This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work with another Wolff Responds 5 weeks counting to the election. I want to talk about why capitalism is not a market system, why calling capitalism a market economy, a free market economy, a market system is not only a mistake, but a mistake that reveals something important for us to understand. So let's go through this. It won't take long. A market is a way of distributing things. Exchanging is a way for me to take something I have and give it to you, and you in exchange give me something. In other words, we distribute each to the other. It's a way of distributing the products of human labor. It's also a way of distributing the resources that go into making the products of human labor. As soon as people stopped being self-sufficient, that is, as soon as we stopped having families working the land and raising everything they ate and making everything they wore and building their shelters, as soon as we had division of labor, I produce this, you produce that, and so on, we had to work out a system of distributing. If I make the bread, it's got to be distributed to all the people who eat it. If I only make bread, then the shirt I'm wearing has to come from somebody else, and so on. Markets are a way of distributing goods and services. Markets are not the only way. Human beings have had many other ways. We have many other ways today. When you sit down for dinner or lunch with your friends or your family, you are, some of you, producing the food and others of you receiving it to eat it. There's a distribution going on there, but it's highly unlikely that a market is the way it's done. Rather, Mama distributes if she's the cook, or Papa distributes if he's the cook, and the rest of you eat, and so forth and so on. It is bizarre to call capitalism a market system. Here are some more reasons. Capitalism involves production, but markets don't have to do with production. Markets have to do with exchange and distribution of things, not with their production. Here's another reason. Slavery had markets. To talk about markets does not mean you're talking about capitalism. It might very well mean you're talking about slavery. For example, the American South before the Civil War was a slave system. There was a market in slaves, there was a market in the cotton that the slaves produced, and so on. Markets are not unique to capitalism. They certainly don't define capitalism. The same is true of feudalism. In many parts of feudalism, serfs produced goods delivered to the lords, who then sold these goods in markets. Sometimes the serfs themselves had markets. Europe is full of serf market monuments. So again, it's bizarre that we have come to call capitalism a market system. The market systems existed long before we have modern capitalism. Well then, two questions. What is capitalism if it isn't a market system? And even more important, why, if it isn't a market system, has capitalism been called that all the time, right to this present day? I would argue that capitalism is distinctive not because of its use of markets, because as I've shown, they existed long before modern capitalism or any kind of capitalism existed. I think capitalism is unique because of the way it carries out production. And what do I mean? It divides the people involved in production into two groups. Those who make all the decisions and run the enterprise, we call them the owner, the major shareholders, the board of directors, the CEO. We all know who they are. They are a minority, a small minority of those involved in production. The vast majority, the other group in production, is called the employees. They are excluded from making all the key decisions, which is a big clue as to why capitalism makes those at the top rich and powerful and the employees neither. It's no surprise given how it's organized. And in this way, capitalism, although different from feudalism and slavery, shares something. Those systems also had a small minority at the top who made all the key decisions and who became wealthy and powerful, while the majority didn't. In slavery, it's masters and slaves. In feudalism, it's lords and serfs. And in capitalism, it's employers and employees. Isn't that interesting? So then why, if what's distinctive about capitalism is the relationship between the employer and the employee, which is quite different from that between lord and serf and master and slave, even though there are also some similarities, well then let's answer the question, why this confusing, mistaken notion of calling capitalism a market system when that really makes no sense? The answer is ideological. The market is an attractive way of describing capitalism. Why? Because there's something voluntary about a market. When you go to market, you can buy A or B or C. You are not forced into something. You can choose to part with your money or you can hold on to your money. You can buy this or that. And only if you're comfortable and happy with the outcome will you make the exchange that defines what goes on in a market. So it's nice to describe capitalism in this way as a market system because it gives you the illusion of freedom, of a quid pro quo. I only give up if I get something equivalent in exchange. What capitalism is really about is what is not talked about, the system of production, what goes on in the workplace. You know, before you can distribute a resource, there has to be a production process for which that resource is an input. And before you can distribute outputs, there has to be the production that produces the output. So it is kind of bizarre in discussing capitalism that you would call it a market system rather than an employer-employee system. Now let's look finally at the employer-employee. First of all, it's glaringly undemocratic. The majority of people do not make the decisions. The majority of people in a capitalist workplace have no power at all. They come to work, they cross the threshold into the factory, the office, the store, and they immediately are told what to do. Sit here, work there, do this, do it that way, work with that machine, and at 5 o'clock, get out of here, and whatever you've produced, what you've poured your brains and muscles into helping to make, belongs to the employer. You get nothing. At the end of the week, you get a wage. Go home, drink some beer, eat some pizza, and come back tomorrow and do it all again. You're told what to do. You're not free at all. Oh, well, I take that back. You can quit, and then you'll live exactly how? You know what you'll end up doing 9 times out of 10? Going and working for another employer in the same arrangement. The production system of capitalism is undemocratic. It's authoritarian. The minority tell the majority what to do. The kings we got rid of in political society 500 years ago, they still live inside our enterprises, but they're called CEOs. And we bend over for them as least as much as people used to bend over for their kings. No, capitalism isn't a market system. It's an authoritarian production system that has outlived its usefulness. It is now a drag on the human race, as we can see from the disasters of global warming, the disasters of a failed dealing with COVID, the disasters of grotesque inequality, and I could go on. So let's start by wising up. Capitalism isn't a market system. The only idea behind calling it that was to deflect, to distract us from the reality of the workplace, the production system, where the ugliness and the dysfunction of capitalism exist and will be visible once we can call capitalism a particular kind of production system and not a market system. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work, welcoming your interest.